Hey, welcome back to Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. I want to talk about the benefits of intuitive decision making. And I'm going to have that conversation with the perfect subject matter expert on the topic. And that's Jessica Pryce-Jones, who started her career in finance, where she learned about numbers, strategy, and leadership. And after 10 years in the corporate world, she completed a psychology degree. She wanted to understand why some of her bosses were brilliant and, frankly, others were quite dismal. We're going to talk all about that. And Jessica, I know, has worked as adjunct faculty in many fantastic academic institutions and has written 2 books previously called Happiness at Work, Maximizing Your Psychological Capital for Success, and Running Great Meetings and Workshops for Dummies. But there's a new book and a lot of new information. And I'm thrilled to once again be joined by Jessica Pryce-Jones. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a huge pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, I really was excited for this conversation because in today's complex world, leaders can't rely on just data alone. And I know that's why you wrote this book, Intuition at Work, Using Your Gut Feelings to Get Ahead. Jessica, when did you get interested in this topic?
Well, I've been interested in it for a long time. And the idea came to me that I really needed to write a book when I was running a coaching session for a senior exec, actually in Chicago. And he said to me, hey, I really want to hire this person. Everybody in my team thinks I shouldn't. And my boss thinks I shouldn't, but I really want to do it. And I said, well, what's your gut telling you? And he said, well, do it. And I said, well, you don't need a conversation with me then. We're done. So, and funny enough, I went back to him 6 months later and he said, it was exactly the right hire. So I'm glad I listened to myself. And I said, good. So then I thought, I really need to crack on and get this book out there. And that was particularly driven by, I thought, just let's test the waters here, test the waters. Don't immediately go with your gut, Jess. And I asked about 50 people, how did you make the last big decision? And they all said to me, it was an intuition thing. It was a judgment. It was a gut feel. It was a hunch. And for me, all those words are the same thing, right? It's your inner knowing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So intuition, how would you define intuition?
Well, that's really interesting. And, I went around the houses on this one and I thought about it for some time because there's lots and lots of different ways. So I started off with it being kind of the traditional one, which is knowing without knowing how you know. And I thought, that's a bit feeble because it's more than knowing. For some people, it's a feeling. And, the academics will tell you something complicated, like it's direct knowledge or thoughts without evident, rational data. So I'm going, oh, that feels a bit complicated. Gut feel is good to me and a feeling of knowing is good to me. So that's how I define it, is a feeling of knowing, because often there's this feeling that, uh-oh, this is the wrong thing, or uh-oh, I'm not sure, or yay, good to go. And so for me, feeling of knowing is what works.
Feeling of knowing. Okay. And this book, again, is really, really fantastic. I hesitate to call it a book because really it's a guide. It's Intuition at Work, Using Your Gut Feelings to Get Ahead. And you, in this fantastic read, you have a practical, easy to use approach to build your intuition, which starts with understanding what intuition is. We've covered that already, but then developing an intuitive process. Let's talk a little bit about that, Jessica.
Yeah, it's what's really interesting, and I've found this out in running lots of workshops, is that everybody's intuitive process is different. And so what becomes then really important is to recognize your own and to be able to distinguish it from other kind of things that are going on. And so that's where understanding, okay, fear turns up for me like this. And I didn't develop all this in a vacuum. I did some classes myself. And I did some really interesting classes with a professor in India who uses intuition for marking all his papers. And he said to me, what's the back of your knees telling you? In one of my one-to-one sessions with him. And I went, oh, that's interesting. I've never really tuned into the back of my knees. But he said for him, that was what worked. So, it's what is it that works for you? What is it that you're noticing? And for me, one of the key things is, what am I noticing around here? Because for some people, it's external cues, right? My attention is being drawn to something. What is that all about? And it might not be clear to you. So for me, for example, what I have noticed is that sometimes I get a big concrete block in my mind's eye. And I'm going, okay, so there's going to be a big challenge in this. And then I have to make myself walk around the big block to see what's on the other side of it. But I know when the big block turns up, there's something going on. So the more you notice about your own intuitive process, the easier it is for you to start working with it and treating it like the friend that it is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we're going to have to squeeze in a quick break in about a minute. But before that, I do want to talk about applying intuition sort of in different roles. We know that intuition takes place. It's something that we need to utilize every single day. But what about in a leadership role? What are some of the tips that you would have for our listeners on how to apply intuition in that setting?
Well, I think as a leader, it's particularly important because you're often having to make calls about things that you don't know anything about. And we are living in this incredibly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. And everybody knows that. And so for me, taking the time and taking a pause to go, okay, what is my body telling me? What are my feelings telling me? And, when I was a young graduate trainee in my first job, I was asked, what do you as a graduate think? And I started my answer with, well, I feel, and I was told by my boss, he barked at me, I'm paying you to think, not to feel. But actually tuning in, feelings is another layer of information, and you can apply that to any decision that you have to make. The real tiny things and the big things at the same time.
Absolutely. Jessica, we're going to have to squeeze in a quick break. We'll be right back and get down to business. Don't touch that dial. Hello and welcome back to Get Down to Business. As I continue my conversation with Jessica Pryce-Jones, we're talking all about intuition at work, which is her new book. It's all about using your gut feelings to get ahead. And Jessica, I appreciate so much of what you've been sharing, which is applicable to entrepreneurs, to business owners, but frankly, to anybody who might be tuning in. Jessica, there are some important do's in the process, but there's always a lot of different don'ts that we have to be mindful of as well. Jessica, what advice would you share with our listeners?
Okay, so let's start with the don'ts so we can leave people feeling on a high with the do's. So I would say, look, don't use your intuition in halt circumstances. So that's when you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. That's when you need to pay attention to your physical needs first. And so that would be my first don't. And then the second thing is, don't, when you're just getting going with this and tuning into yourself, don't assume that everything is always correct. Intuition is inconsistent. And Bill Gates said, my intuition is good enough that every time it arises, I swing the ball. I swing the bat and hit the ball. But it's 80% on. And I think that's probably true for most of us. So I would say, don't always assume it's correct. Go get some information to back it up. So you should be intuiting the data and getting data around your intuitions. And that will be the second tip. And the third is, intuition isn't always what you want to hear. Right. So you might be getting something back and going, no, that's not what I want, because we get ego in there and we get wishful thinking in there and we get all kinds of stuff in. So just take a little time to tune in. And so that would lead me to a couple of do's. So, take your time, take a breath and just go, what am I feeling here? And I think sometimes it's good to get out of where we are usually working, get out, get some perspective, quite literally, take a walk around your block, feel it, follow it, and then document it. And if you can write things down, you can then start to say, am I correct in this or was I not correct? And I wouldn't make a big bet for my first time out there. If it's your first rodeo, you're not going to choose to ride the prize horse and go for the biggest bull. You're going to say, give me something that's, it's going to be smaller than that. Just take it slowly for yourself. And you can start small. So a do would be, how is this next meeting going to go? what might be some feelings that other people will be in the room? So that would be a do. So I would say just take the stress off and take a judgment, take an expectation off, because when you put those on, it's just too easy to go wrong. Just start noticing, what's going on in my body? What's my attention being drawn to? To be an easy place to start. And then you go, okay, I'm getting nothing here. Imagine there's a movie camera in this scenario that you're in. What is the movie camera actually pointing at? So that's another way of doing it when you want to take the stress off yourself. Or, for example, another do would be, look, there's a bad feeling in here. Where does it belong? Another do might be, you could say, imagine the bad feeling as a little cloud and then move it around from person to person, okay? Where does this cloud actually belong? And you then may say, right, the cloud belongs in the middle of the room. Okay, it's all of us contributing to this.
Absolutely. I'm chatting with Jessica Pryce-Jones. I don't want to share all of the secrets, but we do know my big takeaway over here is that great leaders trust their intuition. You've got a great book, Intuition at Work. I want to make sure our listeners can find it and get a hold of you, Jessica. How can they do that?
So please do reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. We've got a group going for anybody who wants to post questions in the group and ask me things. And they can find the book. It will be shortly available on Amazon. It's coming out on July the 26th. And it's been some time in the making. So I'd be thrilled to connect with anybody who wants to connect with me.
Well, congratulations on the book. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. That's a wrap for us this week on Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. You can always get on my website, syklein.com, or of course, subscribe, rate, review, and share on your favorite podcast app to success. Let's get down to business. We'll see you next week.